Hey everybody, I'm Zach from Performance Bicycle, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to fit a mountain bike. Now, the beautiful thing about fitting a mountain bike, and sometimes the frustrating thing about fitting a mountain bike, is that one style of fit isn't necessarily going to apply to every style of mountain biking, because there's several different styles of mountain biking, and a lot of it really has to do with your personal preference on the bicycle and how things feel to you. In general, a downhill rider is going to be much more upright than a cross-country racer. And as we go to all mountain, enduro, trail, cross-country, and cross-country race, the rider is going to get farther forward on the bicycle. We're going to give you some general guidelines to help you, and we're going to cover the two most common styles of mountain biking. This is going to be an all-mountain / enduro style of riding, and then a cross-country racer. We're going to start from the ground up. We do cleats first, then we're going to do the saddle height, then the upper body reach, and then where the levers are and the handlebar width on the bike, depending on your style of riding. So the tools that you'll need to do the mountain bike fit is a hex wrench set, a shock pump, a plumb bob, a torque wrench, and measuring tape and electrical tape are always nice as well. All right folks, so this is Eddie, and we're going to be fitting Eddie on a hardtail front suspension mountain bike. Generally speaking, this style of bike is going to be used for trail riding, cross-country, and cross-country race style. So before we do anything, we're just going to make sure again that Eddie is happy with his cleat setup and his shoes. Again, there's a video that you can check out at our learning center that's going to cover that topic in much more detail, but make sure that you're happy with that. You're also going to want to make sure that the front fork is set up appropriately to the rider's style of riding. This is where you can use a shock pump to make sure that the front fork is set up correctly. All right, so once we have the shoes and the fork set up, we're going to make sure that the saddle height's correct. So very basic, good rule of thumb here when you're setting the saddle height is that when the rider's left leg or right leg is extended to the bottom of the pedal stroke with the crank arms in line with the seat tube, the rider should be able to extend the leg and the ball of the heel should be able to just touch the pedal. As you see here with Eddie, he's got full extension, the ball of the heel is on the pedal and his knee is locked out, which is a perfect saddle height for Eddie. If we were to extend that leg and he was going to have a significant bend in the knee, then we would know that the saddle was too low and we would raise it. On the other hand, if Eddie extended that heel out and the knee was locked and he could not reach the pedal, we would know that the saddle was too high and we would lower it and we would just go back and forth until we were in this position right here. And you can ask the rider, you can say, hey Eddie, can you stand up from that position at all? Nope. No, so Eddie can't get off the saddle in this position, so that's how we know that the saddle height is set appropriately. So once the saddle height is set, we're going to move to the fore and aft position of the saddle. As the front of the knee comes across the pedal stroke while the rider is pedaling, from the 11 o'clock position to about the 7 o'clock position, you want the end of the kneecap to be right above the pedal spindle or the crank arm. So we're going to use our plumb bob to set the fore and aft position. Basically what we're looking for is the knee of the rider to be over the pedal spindle through the front portion of the pedal stroke. So to measure that, we're going to put the foot in a 9 o'clock position so the crank arms are parallel to the ground, and we're just going to take our plumb bob, and there's two ways to do this that are very common out there that you've probably heard of both. The first is to measure from the front of the knee, and as we look down we want that plumb line is lining up right there with the end of the crank arm. The second train of thought is that we measure from the bony protrusion below the knee, and it needs to line up exactly with the pedal spindle. Both measurements are going to be accurate. So while you're measuring, if you're looking at your plumb line and the plumb line is significantly in front of the crank arm or the pedal spindle, you're going to want to slide the saddle backwards. If your plumb line is behind the front of the crank arm or the pedal spindle, depending on where you're measuring from, you're going to want to move the saddle forward. If you significantly move the saddle forward or backwards, that's going to change the effective saddle height of the rider, so you're going to want to double check the ankle measurement at the bottom of the pedal stroke again, just to make sure that both line up. And just go back and forth between the two until you have proper leg extension and proper fore and aft position. So moving on to a full suspension mountain bike setup, we'll talk about some of the differences. The biggest thing is that the suspension is all set up appropriately across the board. And we do have additional videos in our learning center that you can see for more detailed information on that. But quickly speaking, you want to make sure that the front fork and the rear suspension shock are all set up correctly. If you have a dropper seat post, make sure that that's set up correctly as well. If you don't have enough air in the shocks and you set it up right, once you pump them up, it's going to change everything. So just make sure that's dialed in first. The saddle height and the fore and aft position of this style of bike is going to be the same to start off with. If you have a dropper seat post, you're going to want to make sure that it's in the full upright position when you do the fit. Now this style of riding sometimes makes it necessary to have that saddle a little bit lower than it normally would be. You can lower your saddle between 5 to 10 millimeters and you're still going to have an appropriate pedal extension when you're pedaling. Also, with any bike, you want to make sure that the saddle is going to be parallel to the ground within a couple of degrees up or down. If it's too far down or too far up, it's going to make your hip slide on or off of the saddle to the front or the back, and it's not going to give you an efficient pedal stroke. If the saddle's not comfortable at a parallel position within a few degrees, you're going to need to try a different saddle and move on. For the fore and aft position, again, it's going to be exactly like it would be on a hardtail bike. Again, if you have a dropper seat post, make sure it's in the most upright position. If you have a rigid seat post and you do have it lowered, just make sure that you have the height first and then address the fore and aft position. So again, we're looking from the front of the kneecap, and we want to just come over here and make sure that the plumb line is lining up with the pedal spindle. In this case, the plumb line is significantly in front of the end of the crank arm. We would want to slide his saddle back. Again, we're just going to do that back and forth until that plumb line is at the end of the crank arm or at the pedal spindle, depending on where you're measuring from. After that, you want to make sure that your reach is appropriate. In general, your upper body should be between a 50-degree to a 30-degree angle, depending on the riding style that you're doing. A downhill rider, all-mountain enduro rider is going to be a little bit more upright on the bike so they can see the trail a little bit better and be able to react faster to what's in front of them. Upright body position makes it easier to go over rocks and roots and throw the bike around depending on your riding style. You want to have a nice relaxed shoulder position where it just doesn't feel uncomfortable, where you don't feel like you're bunching your shoulders too much and you don't have any pain or discomfort or anything. You want to have a nice kind of relaxed elbow position with a slight bend and kind of like a neutral, if you're going to do a neutral handshake and just turn your wrist sideways into a nice kind of push-up position. You don't want them to be too far inward or too far outward, but it's really just a matter of comfort and what feels good to you. The shoulders are still going to have a relaxed feel, still looking for a slight bend at the elbows, still the same type of push-up position. Once you feel like you have the appropriate handlebar width, you want to make sure that your levers are in the correct position. When you're riding a mountain bike, you're going over rocks and roots, and you don't want to have to move your hands around and take your grip off of the bars to be able to hit your brakes or your shifters. So you just want to make sure it's a nice, easy reach to them, and everything is within grasp. Same principle is going to apply to the levers and the shifters. Again, you just want to make sure that your hands don't have to come off of the handlebars to be able to reach the shifters and the brakes and all the levers. So those are some basic guidelines on how to fit various styles of mountain bikes. If you run into any troubles along your way, feel free to visit our Learning Center online at performancebike.com or go see a Performance Fit specialist at any of our retail locations. Have a great ride.